Okay, I'm gonna let people join, seeing people rolling in. Okay, welcome everybody to the UMaine Artificial Intelligence webinar series. My name is Sarah Howarth. I'm a member of the UMaine AI Steering Committee and a faculty member in the College of Education and Human Development here at the University of Maine. Before we start, first, I would like to thank the UMaine AI Initiative for helping to plan this event and the IEEE Maine section for sponsoring this webinar. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our panelists, my colleagues and friends. Jamie Basham is a professor in the Department of Special Education at the University of Kansas. His work is focused on developing future-ready learning environments that are equitable, beneficial, and meaningful for all learners. He has several federally and privately funded research and technical assistance projects, including the Center for Innovation, Design, and Digital Learning, or CIDL, that he'll talk about today. He's well published, has given hundreds of talks, and serves on various national and international boards for journals, companies, and educational organizations. He has also served on the technical work group for the last two National Educational Technology Plans and was an advisor for the U.S. Department of Education's Toolkit for AI integration. Dr. Matthew Marino is a professor at the University of Central Florida. His research involves technology, executive function, and universal design for learning. Dr. Marino is a co-PI of the National Center for Innovation, Design, and Digital Learning, where he coordinates the Tech Alliance for Maine, Idaho, and Washington. He also leads a team as a principal investigator at Inclusive Education Services, which provides independent living and vocational preparation for individuals with intellectual disabilities ages 18 to 28. Yaren Sung is a doctoral student in the Department of Special Ed at the University of Kansas and a graduate research assistant at CIDL. Her research centers on using emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence to provide personalized learning experiences in inclusive settings. She is currently analyzing the themes of state-level AI guidance that we'll discuss today for K through 12 education. Just a simple housekeeping item I want to remind everybody of. Please make sure to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen for any questions that will be asked. And I will ask them if they're relevant while they're talking, but they will also allow about 10 minutes at the end of their presentation for Q&A. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. It's good to see everyone. We're looking forward to having a discussion here today. And here's just, as Sarah just introduced us so nicely, we tried to have fun with it and actually have AI develop some images of our likenesses. Matt is a little bit much for us here, as you can see. He thinks he's a superhero. I just climb mountains for a living, and with Erin. So anyhow, welcome everyone. Today, really what we want to do is spend a few minutes here introducing the CIDL Center, all of the resources that we have to offer, but then really discuss AI guidance and themes that are emerging across the nation. And we'll do a real brief intro on that, and then really spend a lot of time on what we're seeing with state policy guidance around education, and then what are some efforts ongoing to support an understanding of AI. So the CIDL Center, or CIDDL, is a nationally funded center through the U.S. Department of Education to really innovate the field of special education, but really a focus on all students. So our big push is to support faculty in higher education in the way they prepare personnel to be in the classroom, to use innovative technologies. And obviously much of that work over the last couple of years has been on artificial intelligence. Although the very first thing that we put out for the CIDL Center back in 2020 was on AI, and Matt led that effort then, and it just kind of has continued throughout. You can learn more about the CIDL Center at ciddl.org. We are a partnership across multiple institutions, University of Kansas, University of Central Florida, CAST, who are the developers of UDL, and the Materi Group, who are a renowned research group in educational technology. Our general focus are on four primary things. The first one is on supporting knowledge, adoption, and use of educational technology across the field. While our focus has been primarily on higher education and doing that work, obviously a lot of our folks that we work with are also in the K-12 sector. And as we get into conversation here today, you'll learn that some of the work that we're doing in the K-12 sector, such as helping states and school districts set up AI policy and considerations for that, and doing needs assessments in that area as part of our work in that realm. But we're also working on a range, supporting institutions of higher education and adopting a range of technologies in supporting personnel development in the education sector. We support a personalized learning professional learning network that is, it's a for us, by us sort of network. And then we were lucky enough to also provide intensive technical assistance to 10 different universities.
And Jamie, before you jump forward, let's just let them know that they can join this little community, and it's actually really beneficial for you guys to go in, network with people, ask questions. As you're thinking about developing a state level AI policy, there's folks in the community who can help.
Exactly. So Matt, you want to talk a little bit about our Tech Alliance?
Yeah, I will. I'll talk a little bit about the Tech Alliance. So I am privileged to be the lead liaison for CITL with the state of Maine. And so I was up there for the last year. I've been visiting Maine and working with Dr. Howarth and other folks up there to develop a case study of what's happening at the University of Maine and look at how AI can be integrated into their education program. They're doing some really innovative things. I will point out that we actually had a publication in the Journal of Research on Innovative Teaching and Learning this past year that was led by Dr. Howarth. So that was quite a privilege to be a part of that. Okay, James.
Great. So let's kind of dive into what we're starting to see across the nation, both in education and beyond, just so everyone kind of has a broad understanding anyhow of the way that AI is starting to impact society as a whole. And obviously our focus is on education generally, but we want to kind of look at the whole thing. So a study that came out last year by Microsoft and LinkedIn found that 75% of our knowledge workers are using AI today. And in fact, most of them, if you get further into the report, are saying they're using it on a daily basis. What's interesting about 46% of those workers just started using it within 6 months of that time. This came out last May. So we are almost to a year past. We're going to be there pretty soon. And we anticipate an increase in that. So what's more interesting about this number is that what the workers went on to say is that most of their bosses don't know they're using it on a daily basis because they don't want to report it. And they don't want to report it for a couple of reasons. One, they're afraid they're going to get in trouble. And two, they're afraid that if they report it, their boss is going to give them more work to do because they're accomplishing their job at much less time. So these are just like little pieces of the puzzle that you have to start kind of putting together. And
Right,
this is, go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, that's one of the things when we look at what our students are going to be doing and what we should be preparing them for as they come out of school, they need to be prepared to integrate AI into the workforce. And so we're really in need of focusing on that.
Yeah, it's important. I gave a talk actually for last June to a bunch of business leaders in the Kansas City area. And one of the CEOs said, hey, look, he said, we're not going to be replacing you with AI anytime soon, but we are going to be replacing you with people that know how to use AI effectively. And that's, I think, a sentiment that's rising. And this number here that we're showing right now kind of goes into this conversation. We know that roughly 40% of the worldwide workforce has high exposure to the use of AI in their work right now. And that's of the worldwide workforce. If we look at most developed countries, the US being one of them, about 60% of our workforce has high exposure to the use of AI in their jobs. Now, we do know, and people have read probably the headlines on this, is AI can be disruptive to the workforce? It is going to be disruptive and different from other technological innovations over time. The expectation is that it's going to be the most disruptive to the white collar workforce. And that's different than we've had in the past. And so the idea that we have to start preparing people for that future is here and now. As I told the Senate Help Committee recently, I said, you know, the education system's like a tree. The best time to plant the tree was 20 years ago. But if you didn't plant it 20 years ago, the best time to plant it is now, because it takes about 20 years for that investment to really pay out to the economy. So here's some of the data that we're seeing in the Siddle Center and the work that we're using to drive some of ours. This is national data we're looking at from last year. And we know that 71% of students, 64% of teachers agree that AI is helpful in the work that they do. We know about 28% in this study, and we'll see a different study in a bit, but 28% of teachers have experimented with specifically generative AI, and that's just one type of AI. 34% are regularly using it at school. Students are using it outside of school on a daily basis. And of course, this again is something that's a year old. And so we anticipate looking at this data this year, and it's going to change quite a bit. We've had, and here's the one that we often get questions about. We don't have any data to this point that there's been a significant increase in cheating using AI. And that's a question that we often get. But what about the cheating?
And what is cheating with AI?
Yeah, that's a big conversation as well. I think most people think of plagiarism, which we also know, and we get this question quite a bit as well, Matt, as you know. How do I detect AI? There's not a real good detection system, and none of them are reliable at this point. In fact, what we've been telling states and people that ask, based on the data that we have seen, if you have a salesperson trying to sell you a reliable checker of AI, you have a salesperson trying to sell you something, but it's not exactly what they're selling. So there's no data to support that anything can really detect it on a reliable manner at this point in time. So let's go to the next slide. So we do know that teacher education overall, within teacher education, we have a faculty that is not ready to adopt and have an understanding of AI. There's very few of us. There's very few Sarahs in the world, if you will. There's very few of us that actually
have the University of Maine.
Yeah, there's very few people across the nation that are actually knowledgeable enough to teach and develop an understanding of AI within the future workforce. And we know that even when we embed and think about AI with technologies and tools that are foundational to the field of special education, like assistive technology, again, we don't have very many people. About 65% of the people say, I don't even, I don't understand that yet. I don't have the knowledge and skills to be able to do that. When we talk to parents and families, now this is interesting. One of the things we've been doing at the Siddle Center is helping school districts develop needs assessments so that they can start developing plans to adopt AI within the work that they're doing. And so one of the key features of that is to talk to parents. They're critical within the IEP, within the educational process. And we know that teachers are hungry and interested, or teachers and parents are hungry and interested in learning about AI. And in fact, when we get to parents specifically, what we have found is that most of them just need a basic introduction to AI, that they have a very little understanding of what AI actually is and how it could be used. They need to understand the technical aspects, how to reasonably teach their children about AI, the benefits to their children of AI, and they are concerned about the workforce and the future of the workforce and making sure that their children are ready for the future. And that's
Jamie, I would say
growing
that a lot of
conversation.
times in the teenagers in my house, at least, the children are teaching the parents about AI.
Yeah,
this is something I think we need to be open to, is letting our kids show us what they're doing and then being able to take that and ask some informed questions and help them make informed decisions.
This is right. And I think that's part of the process, is being critical consumers of everything that we use from a technological stance, but AI is one of them. And I think we need to have, as we'll get into later, a little bit later, that, information literacy, digital literacy is a key component of what we need to be doing in schools. Obviously, Maine as a state has been forward on this for a couple decades now, 2 or 3 decades now, where Maine's really adopted a technology forward sort of view on things. And they're noted across the nation for that. You all are noted for some of the projects you did early on and continue to do. So having a digital literacy and having in-depth digital literacy at K-12 that expands, and then having educating parents on that's critically important. We know teachers are very concerned about the use of AI. They want to be able to use it, but and these are common themes. If I were to talk to you about the use of PowerPoint or presentation technology in schools, 20 years ago, we would hear similar themes. Like, I don't have the time to learn how to do it. I don't know around the ethics around it. So it's some of the common themes that we've been seeing with technology integration for multiple decades now. We're seeing with AI, although AI, I think, and many of us who have studied this know that AI is probably going to have a bigger and larger impact overall than something like a presentation tool. So being able to have develop the mindset within your students on how to use it effectively, considering things like the ethics and data privacy and security is a critical point. Again, these are some of the data that we gathered last year as we were helping districts understand what their needs were in their district. But we do want to spend some time talking about AI state policy and guidance. Erin, you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. So the Citadel Center has been interested in monitoring and analyzing state-level AI guidance. So which states officially release state-level AI guidance, and what are the common themes around it? And if you scan the QR code, it'll take you to the Citadel webpage with downloadables. It's very useful. I highly recommend it. And as of November 2024, there were 19 state education agencies that officially released state-level AI guidance with a focus of K-12 education and students. And as far as I know, Georgia released one recently, so there are like 20 right now. And we excluded some of, yeah.
Go ahead.
Right.
And I was just going to say, we're going to be updating them soon. I know we're in the
Oh,
midst
yeah,
of updating. Yeah.
we're planning on updating in a couple of weeks. And we excluded some states because those states provided a list of resources instead of guidance, or there were some that did not have focus on students and rather have focus on employees, or not education, but in general. So about the themes, we identified 5 major themes, including potential benefits of AI, potential risk of AI, ethical use of AI, K-12 policy development, and human training and support. And the ones with stars indicate those including student with disabilities in the themes. Yes, the first and the biggest theme is the potential for personalized learning, and it's also the goal of using AI in education, because AI has potential to generate personalized lesson plans, instructional materials, and to the students' ends, there are some possibilities to provide personalized instant feedback in a very timely manner. It can benefit all students, and especially those for students with disabilities, because they are supposed to have individualized education programs and have individualized all the education stuff, And some other potential benefits of AI involve
Sorry, I skipped ahead.
Back to the first slide of the policy, please.
Oh, you want to go back one?
Back. That one. So some other potential benefits of AI include efficiency, because it can streamline all the administrative tasks of teachers, and creativity. All the students can create music and arts and creative writing and stuff. And AI also can enhance collaboration and communication, both among students, because they can talk about the product of AI, but also it students have chance to collaborate and communication with AI as well. And one of the most important part of AI is that it can enhance accessibility for learning for all students, including those with disabilities. For example, AI-powered text-to-speech and speech-to-text can benefit those with physical challenges or those with learning disabilities. And translation tools can benefit multilingual learners. And those who need support on executive functions can benefit from AI-powered planning tools.
And what's interesting is we are seeing this across multiple states. So you're seeing the states there. If you go to our website, you could download these reports and actually look at them and investigate them, and then also look at the different states.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had a question that came in, and I think this might be a good time to ask it if that's okay with you.
Sure.
The question was, you may cover this later, but how do you recommend assessing the accessibility of AI tools when integrating them into your classrooms? Many tools don't have VPATs, and the tech changes so fast that they couldn't keep up anyway. How can we ensure the AI tools we choose are accessible to all students, including those who use assistive technology like screen readers?
So this has been an ongoing push within the AI industry to have VPATs available for people. So VPATs are, I know that many companies right now are starting to use VPATs and trying to use those and get those online. I was
Jamie,
on with a
why don't you
group.
tell everyone what that is?
Yeah, I
So
don't.
it's so so it's a self-reported accessibility. I mean, in summary, it's a self-reported accessibility report and how they're providing for accessibility. I mean, that's the simplest explanation. But it does rely on the company to actually do the work. And so one of those things that we've been pushing for across the industry is to have VPATs on file. But like any sort of technology, and people that study accessibility overall know that accessibility is something that can be a one-off sort of thing. Obviously, we have the WCAG standards and such. And so you would use the normal sort of checkers for some of those things to make sure that it's following WCAG, look at what the company is reporting, and encourage your states specifically, especially if they're on this list where they provide for accessibility, to really support their vendors in living up to that, right? So it's important for the states to, if the state's calling for accessible technology to be within their state and to meet WCAG standards, 2.1 or whatever, then they need to encourage that within their vendor relationships.
Thank
And
you.
Jamie, I would chime in here and say, if I was a teacher in a school, I wanted to adopt some technology. I wasn't sure if it was going to be accessible or not. I would go to my tech coordinator, say, reach out to the company, please. Send me a copy of it for use, for 30 days. And I would try it in my classroom and just make sure. Because you can read on paper, it may say it's accessible for X, Y, and Z. I don't know if this has happened to you before, Jamie, but in my classroom, I get something in and it's not what the company said it was going to do. So I
Yeah,
would test it myself.
I mean, that's always then, testing it yourself is critically important. Testing it with the students that are going to use it is critically important. I'm considering the time, and my hope is that if we get the state level involved in saying that we require our technologies to be, WCAG compliant, for instance, that it at least provides a stable foundation for teachers to actually not have to take the time out of their busy schedules to do that work. But at the end of the day, it always does come down to the individual user being able to use the product system. And that's something critically important. What we want to do is make sure that, especially as we highlight the slide here, that if these states are requiring their AIs to be accessible, that the state then makes sure that the vendors within those states are supporting that work. But yeah, I agree, Matt.
Thank you.
Yep. So there are many benefits of AI, but there are potential risks as well, such as inaccuracy and bias, because AI models are trained with human data that already contains inaccuracy and bias. They make some mistakes like humans do. And we all know that over-relying on AI can harm students' learning instead of enhancing learning. So that's one thing to think about. So this is why a lot of states advocate for human-centered AI to always keep human in the loop. So the task should always start from humans, like teachers or students, and they can ask AI to do a certain kind of task, but it should always come back to human. So human should be responsible to check whether all the information are accurate and whether there are some biased information and give feedback to AI. And some states also mention that AI should always be used to enhance human values in a way that is aligned with human values.
Yeah, I think the human in the loop conversation is critically important. Just because we have an AI that we're using in our classroom or our school, we need to make sure that we prepare our workforce and people to use AI where the AI, they're not just solely relying on the AI. That again goes back to being a critical consumer, but it's also a critical user of these systems.
Mhm.
Along with this, although there are many risks of AI, there are still a lot of potential benefits. So it is very important to ensure equitable or equal access to AI for all students. Because like in a situation where AI is allowed to use, if some students have access to AI and some students don't, it's not really fair for them, because some students will get all the benefits and some students don't. And this is especially critically important for students with disabilities because AI offers opportunities to have equal access to education. And along with these points, there are some more considerations to understand ethical use, such as privacy and security. Like especially when you're using a free version of AI models, it can use your data to train AI models. So you don't want to share any personally identifiable information, such as students or your home address, phone number, social security number, and such. And there are some existing policies around it, such as FERPA and COPA, like regarding privacy and security. So you might want to consider whether your AI use aligns with the existing policy as well. And about academic integrity is the educators are more concerned about that. Jamie and Matt already touched a little bit. And this is the reason why a lot of states advocate for K-12 policy development and they identify need for training and support. In classroom level, it'll be critically important for teachers and students to have a lot of conversation and collaborate in developing their the AI use in classroom, like how, in what situations they can use AI and how to use AI and such. And in school and district level, the AI policy should be robust enough so all the stakeholders, school leaders, and students and teachers have common understanding about the use of AI. But at the same time, it should be flexible enough because all the classrooms and schools are in different situations. So they might want to adapt based on their needs. So moving on to the need for training and support. Go back one slide, please.
Okay.
Yep, thank you. And training and support are both important for both teachers and students, like how to use AI, like to understand how AI work and how to use them wisely. And it comes down to the topic of AI literacy. Like some states like North Carolina, North Dakota, and Wisconsin provided a little bit of guidance on how to teach AI literacy, but not a lot of states do. So the CITL Center has been interested in delving in a little deeper in AI literacy. So we wrote some blog posts around it, conceptualizing AI literacy and research trends and teaching AI literacy by grade levels. And the third one is a synthesis of the two or three states that mention how to teach AI by grade levels. And the first two are more around like literature and research. So if you're interested in reading more, feel free to scan the QR code and learn more about it. So with all these themes we've explored, if you want to implement AI, these are the steps that you can use. The first is to establish a foundation, especially among the school leaders and stakeholders. And second is to develop your staff. Third is to educate students and community. And fourth is to assess and progress. And this should be a cyclical and iterative process. So Matt, do you want to dive a little bit deeper in AI policy development to build a foundation?
Sure, thanks, Sharon. Did we have any questions, Sarah, before we go to the next?
There is one question, if
Okay.
this is a good time. The terminology used to discuss AI in education presents challenges in precision and clarity. For instance, generative and reasoning AI models used for creative writing and mathematical computations serve different purposes than AI agents and predictive AI. How well do you think our current taxonomy or framework for categorizing AI captures these distinctions, and how important is it to refine and clarify this taxonomy in educational discussions?
That's a great question. I think it depends
Great.
on the framework you're talking about to begin with, right? So what framework would you recommend, Dr. Basham?
Well, I was going to say, this has not been an ongoing debate in the academic literature for some years now. So this is not a new debate. I think it's only going to grow worse when we get into other applications of AI. So there's an organization, AIforeducation.org, that our colleague Jody Britton and her colleagues at, and I'll put it in the, I just answered that with I didn't mean to do that, but I answered with a URL. And AIforeducation.org does kind of get into a little bit of the taxonomy associated with some of the stuff. They also have a leaderboard for large language models around pedagogical structures within education. So it provides at least some framework for that. But Matt, I think it's a debatable sort of ongoing debate. So if someone is out there, it sounds like someone in the audience is out there thinking about a taxonomy, I would encourage you to advance the taxonomy in the literature base.
Agreed.
Do it.
All right, thank you. So the next section is a little bit about developing your own state level policy. And the 5 steps that you see here, starting with stakeholder engagement, then policy drafting, piloting the policy, review and revise, and then implement and monitor, right? Those are the steps that every state needs to go through. I would argue that potentially the most critical phase here, they're all critical, but the most critical is actually piloting the policy. We've seen a number of states who write a policy, they throw it into play at the state level, and then they have all kinds of unintended consequences that emerge as soon as the policy rolls out. I would rather see that happen at a school or district level prior to statewide implementation. And so I would caution you guys in the state of Maine, as you're doing this, to think about all the different communities you serve, whether that's in Portland or whether you're up far, up to the far north, because you have such a diverse topography in Maine and group of students. You really need to think about everybody as you're developing this. Okay, so as I was trying to conceptualize how we were going to help you, go on to the next slide, please, Jamie. This past weekend, I developed this AI Policy Explorer, and I was thinking, if I was going to take all of the state policy websites that are already in existence, and I linked those and I dropped the PDFs in, and I put in all the state websites, and I developed this GPT. So if you click on this code, you can get in and actually play with this for yourselves. Now, caveat here, we had our group test it, and Jamie tested it, Urin tested it. They tried it on the app. It did not work successfully as an app. But if you load it in your browser, I think it's going to work. And what I want to do is show you some examples of the things that this will do for you to help you out. And so that does not look like a slide that I created.
No, I don't know what, I'm going to go back to our presentation here.
Okay, so the prompt is compare and contrast the following states. And I just chose those in terms of their AI policy documents. So next slide, James.
Okay.
Okay, so the comparison points, this tool will actually go in and compare across points that are similar. So comparison points, ethical use, and privacy, you can see here it's giving you the information that you need about AI use and data privacy, calling out Alabama and Georgia for having their detailed frameworks. And then under human oversight, you also have Alabama and Georgia stressing the importance of human oversight. Down in policy development, we have each stakeholder encourages a structured approach, with Georgia and Louisiana providing specific frameworks for district policy adoption. And I think that's important for you guys to consider as you look across Maine, because you have these diverse districts you have. You need to be thinking about whether you want to offer specific guidance or not. Okay, and then implementation strategies. I really like this because Georgia's traffic light system, which is essentially red, yellow, and green, right, for different types of AI. That's a really interesting approach to how they're going to deal with AI. All right, next slide, please. And then the contrast points. So approach to use of AI, that the traffic light, as I just mentioned, was interesting. Louisiana has more of a tiered approach. And then the emphasis on infrastructure, with Louisiana providing technical guidelines for infrastructure. I don't know if that's going to apply. I think back to my time when I was a teacher and a technology coordinator in rural Vermont, and I was up on the Canadian border. And I would say that our technology considerations were much different from a school in Burlington, because they had much higher bandwidth, much more efficient servers and higher GPUs. So very different environment, and that would be something for you guys to think about. Okay, anyway, you can replicate this on your own with this GPT moving forward. Next slide. I just want one more example. Okay. So I asked it to create a table for me summarizing the major AI policy themes across the New England states. And I really thought this was going to be a curveball for it and it was going to get confused. And it actually put out something that I thought was pretty meaningful. So you can see the different states here and the comparison. You can see in Maine, it says that your major AI policy themes are AI education and workforce development. I don't know if that's the case or not, but I thought it was a really interesting finding. And then looking to a state like Connecticut, you have studying AI's impact before implementing regulations. I think that's part of the pilot testing, so I think that's important too. Now, I'm guessing everyone in the audience is now playing with this GPT, at least in my own mind. That's what I see happening. They're like, oh, let's see what this will do. Okay, so if you have any questions about it, I'm happy to answer those now, or we can come back to that at the end.
There are no current questions, but
Excellent, excellent.
that they are kicking the tires on it.
They're checking it out right now. All right, so there's the overview of how to develop your AI policy.
So Matt, I was also imagining the GPUs at OpenAI just lighting up with people using your GPT.
Yeah, they're going server overload.
Yeah. So let's just talk a little bit about national guidance. It's changing on a daily basis. We'll say that right now. There is an AI toolkit that existed by the Office of Educational Technology.
And what happened to that office today?
We're not going to talk about that in this call.
Oh.
But we do have access to it. If people email us, we can send you a copy of it. And I'm sure Sarah and others may also have access to the toolkit or a downloaded copy somewhere. But one thing I would pay attention to is the NIST standards. So many people in the education system don't realize that we do have a National Institute of Standards and Technology. This National Institute is actually central to everything that we do that have standards in our country. You can imagine, how difficult it was at one time to take a railroad from one state to another if they had different gauges of rails. So this National Standards of Technology tends to deal with issues around those types of topics. They have put together some risk management and structures for thinking about AI, to ensure that it is supporting the needs of our country. And so you can download some of that stuff, and I would encourage you to download it at nist.gov/artificial intelligence. There's a QR code there. But one of the things I want to highlight that aligns with some of our conversation that we've just had is this notion that risk management and AI risk management is probably a term that may scare people because we don't often think about risk management in schools. I know my wife is an education leader, she does at times, but um, risk management is something, it's a positive way of looking at how we conduct and do our needs assessment to think critically about the use of AI in our schools. The idea that very similar to what we've already highlighted in the work that Jörn and Matt have done is the concept of developing a culture that kind of embraces the future of schools around AI. But then also mapping and identifying how it can help, where the needs are, but also where the risks are, such as personally identifiable information, ensuring that we're meeting FERPA guidelines and others, and then prioritizing how we can use that and continually measure that risk, in that notion, and then continually look at how do we increase its capacity to be used in a beneficial way for humans with the notion of humans at the center. And so again, if you look at some of the NIST artificial intelligence risk management framework, and it's not just designed for schools, it's really designed for all people. And all businesses. So if you're a small business out there and you're watching this for some reason, the NIST standards can help you think through how you might be able to use it in your line of work. So a lot of what we do at CITL is supporting understanding around artificial intelligence. Obviously, we spend a lot of time thinking about, we start thinking a lot about not artificial intelligence, but just every form of technology. AI has taken a lot of our work lately. Last spring, we produced a pretty in-depth sort of handbook, if you will, or understanding of artificial intelligence in the support of students with disabilities. It runs about 100 pages. So, assuming you need a little light read on that, we had researchers and authors across the country that kind of came together to help support that work. In fact, folks here in Maine help support that, conceptualize some of that work. And we want to recognize Sarah and the team for doing some of that work. So this is a freely available document for you to download. The other thing we do is we do have AI office hours every couple of weeks at the CITL Center. In fact, we just had one yesterday where we jump on for about a half hour. We usually have a featured speaker that talks for 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. And then we try to answer any questions that people have for around their AI needs. And we've had anywhere from district to state leaders to folks in higher education just ask questions. And if we don't have the answer for you, we try and find it and get the answer to you. So those AI office hours are there. We've also done a lot of work on thinking about and talking to people across the field on leveraging technologies to support things like research. So educational research specifically. And so we have various resources for you on the CITL website. This is one of them. Again, I think, Sarah, you were involved in this one too, weren't you? On leveraging technologies to support research, and it's really focused on faculty, educational researchers, doctoral students, et cetera. And it does say special education because that's how we're funded, and we wake up in the morning thinking about how to support special educators and folks with disabilities. But if you download this document, it's going to help you in any sort of educational research field. There's applications and for you to think about and using that work.
I think our lecturer, Dr. Crystal Mary, helped a lot with that too when she was a doctor.
Oh yeah, I forget you guys have her up there now. She's phenomenal. Yeah. So we want to kind of end, Matt. I don't know if you want to jump into the call to action. but
Sure. I mean, we think it's very important that you consider the importance of state level policies for responsible AI use. And you guys are obviously at a spot where you're thinking about this. But it's super important that you bring in all of the stakeholders and have a conversation with them before you jump into charging a committee with another task that they're going to go off and do, right? Because you've got to hear everybody's voices. In my mind, that's the biggest concern looking forward, at least in terms of the state level policy. You also need to have a mechanism to continuously evaluate and improve. And so that means with every policy, if you have specific initiatives, you need a measurable outcome that you can then determine whether the school or district has made progress toward that. So you can come back and then iteratively refine the policy based on what's actually happening, right? The policy shouldn't be written, put on a shelf somewhere, and then we're going to refer to that. As was mentioned earlier, AI is changing so fast that you could write a policy today, and in 6 months, it needs to be revised. And so continuously thinking that it's not a static document, but it's something that's going to be iteratively refined is important. And then make sure that people stay in the center. And so as you're looking at the policy, make sure that you have responsible individuals who are looking at the data, continuously evaluating, and then going back to those stakeholders and asking them if this is doing what we said it needed to do in order to be effective.
yeah, Matt, I just want to highlight again how critically important that first point is in thinking about the responsible use of AI and the importance of it in our future. You know, we've been called into a couple of meetings over the last couple of years as states were developing and thinking about their policy. And in particular, I'm thinking of one meeting I was called into where a state had brought together people that were concerned about AI, and they were really thinking about that, but they weren't concerned about the responsible use of it. They were wanting to ban it. And last fall, I had the opportunity to go give a talk to the chief state school officers across the nation on this very topic. And that state was sharing how in their state it's still banned. Now, the problem with that notion goes back to one of the initial slides we showed, where this is going to impact beyond education. We're going to be thinking about the future of the workforce, the future of the economy, and all those sort of interactions. And so thinking about bringing the right mix of people together is a critical step in this process. And I would encourage any state that's taking this on to think about, you want to bring people that are kind of from all ilks together to think about this, but we need people that are kind of educated in that process to consider all these uses. So, and it has to be about responsible use.
And I will reiterate that you cannot ban it. That's a ridiculous.
Yeah.
And you talk to any teenager who goes into a school where AI is banned, and you say, okay, well, what do you do if you can't use it on the school network? And they say, well, I just swap over and I hook up to my phone and I use it through my phone.
Right.
So there's no possible way you're going to stop students from using AI in their coursework.
Right.
You need to figure out how to do it effectively through some sort of guidance document.
Yeah, exactly. So we want to give an opportunity to, I know we've had a couple questions throughout, but we want to open this up to further questions and allow people to ask us what they want to ask us.
Right. So we, if you have questions that you want to ask, there is an anonymous question. If you think it's a silly question, you can ask it anonymously. But we do have a can of worms question.
Oh, good.
Are you ready for a can of worms question?
We always like a
Yes.
good can of worms.
I'm watching. I also see the question. So
You
yes.
also see the question, Jamie.
Yeah.
So what happens to this project? And I think they mean CITL, or maybe the Office of Ed Tech, guidance. I don't know. What happens to this whole project that we've been discussing if the Federal Department of Education is eliminated? And I can't believe we're even asking that, but it's there.
We are currently operating as business as normal. I will say that. And that's what we've been asked to do. We are a federally funded project out of the U.S. Department of Education. And so we serve them as needed. as a cooperative agreement. So, but currently we're operating as normal.
Good answer. So the next question is from Dr. Ju-Young Lee, who's a assistant professor here. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. We all know that teachers today use AI tools to develop lesson plans and resources. However, there is also a risk that they may rely on AI-generated materials that lack scientific evidence, particularly for students with disabilities. In this challenging time, when we may risk losing access to credible, research-based resources from government websites, I would love to hear your thoughts as a researcher and teacher educator on how we can help teachers develop critical thinking skills to distinguish between evidence-based practices from pseudoscientific approaches in the context of AI. It's a great question.
That's a great question. Matt, do you want to take the first stab?
at it?
What's that?
I said, do you want to take the first stab at that? I've got a few
Well,
notes.
yeah. So, I mean, I could just talk to you about what we've been doing here at the University of Kansas and the work that goes on here. And we're kind of encouraging it in the Civil Center and the work that we're doing individually with small groups is, again, it's about developing educators as critical thought leaders in adopting and using evidence-based and high leverage practices in their work. We have to develop a thorough understanding of these folks, and I like to refer to them, and you could talk about it in various different ways, as learning engineers or learning designers. And we want to encourage teachers to have a mindset where they're actually thinking about the evidence-based practices and the high leverage practices as they take them in and use them. And then also think about the different tools at which they can be used and deployed. So, for instance, Yuran and I and one of our other students, Teddy Kim, we teach a class every fall, and it's a strategies and practice, evidence-based strategies and practices course for middle school and secondary content area teachers that are going to be teachers, they're pre-service teachers. And we spent a lot of time this year integrating and having conversations around the ethical use of AI, the effective uses of AI, and we encourage them in teaching them things like prompt engineering and techniques to help support, like sussing those things out, in them being critical consumers and understanding the ins and outs of using these tools as we think about these things. I think it takes a deeper understanding of the way we educate teachers rather than just saying, go do these 10 practices and have at it. We have to turn them into thinking about, and then gathering, as Matt was kind of saying with one of the earlier slides, we have to encourage our teachers to gather formative data to make decisions about what's working and what's not, and then have an understanding of what to do next. Matt, I don't know if you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, well, I would just say in addition to that, Jamie, those are all good points. I would also say that if you're going to use AI and you want folks to be critical consumers, then they should be using the language to get at the evidence-based practices that they're looking for. And so they need to be including that as part of their prompts, right? So any of the prompts that I'm writing are asking to produce evidence-based results, or I'm looking for something from a peer-reviewed scientific journal article. And so if you're including that in your prompts, I have not seen it return results that aren't actually evidence-based or are not referenced if you're doing that in these big open source models. And so I would say that that's an important add to the prompt.
Yeah, I know that there are various, and to add to it even further, I was actually online with a group this morning earlier that they're building small language models to ingest the various resources right now that are available online that highlight evidence-based practices, so that we're going to be able to have a database that is, depends how you define intelligence, semi-intelligent, that teachers can go and ask it around how to, what evidence-based practices could be used towards, supporting XYZ needs. And so this is I think we're going to see new tools coming out that support that.
We may see one this week. I got a note from one of my doctoral students this morning, said that there was a new AI coming that's going to be equivalent to GPT-5 and it's going to be open source. He thought
Right.
it was coming this week. He's a computer scientist that we grabbed for the Institute. So it's always exciting to have the doc students sending me notes about exciting AI that's coming. You're muted, Sarah. I see your mouth going, but I don't hear you.
We have 3 more questions. I should have figured this out by now. The unmute button. Instead of an AI arms race where educators try to catch students using AI and students try to avoid detection, how can we build trust through guidance and teaching and learning design? Can you share an example of an effective approach? That's from BJ Kitchen here at UMaine.
I've actually, in my teacher preparation classes, I've actually have been encouraging lots of conversation, as I said earlier, around ethical uses and things that have worked and things that haven't worked, and how it helps people go through the learning process and actually how it hurts people in the learning process. I mean, one of the conversations we have to have is what's important and how humans learn, right? And so one of the things I did, and I found it to be fairly effective, is I actually encourage students, I would give them extra credit if they figured out a way to cheat. So,
That won't
but
be controversial at all, Dr. Basham.
well, they had to report that they cheated, and they had to be successful in cheating before they reported it. So I kind of like how we find bugs in software systems, right? And we didn't have anyone report ways that they cheated, but we had lots of conversations around how they tried to cheat, it didn't work. And that does a couple different things. One, it encourages the class to have a conversation around what's working and what's not working and the ethical uses of it. And two, it then provided the instructional team ways to think about, oh, how do we need to redesign our instruction or our assessments and our product systems to bring the human nature out of humans? And that's been an encouraging sort of thing. And we did actually change some of the way some of the products we wanted the students to produce based on that. But
So one of the best answers I've heard to that question is if you don't want students to use AI to cheat, don't ask them to complete assignments that AI can complete.
right.
And so a perfect example of that is oftentimes I teach online courses, and online courses always use discussion boards, right? So
Right.
I require my students to submit either an audio or a video discussion post rather than type it in. If they're able to, because our learning management system allows that. It's really hard to have AI recreate a video of you talking.
Yeah,
It
it takes a lot of time to make that
takes a
happen.
lot of time to make that happen. So
Today
it's
it does, but I would say in 6 months, it could be I upload an image of myself and the entire discussion post is immediately created with a few keywords.
right. Look at what students decided to do over Zoom, where they created a little video loop of themselves and then went and just left their video camera background on, right?
Right.
So there is another question. Are there conversations at CITL? Oh, my earring just fell off. Regarding redefining education, work, and success. Mean what those mean going forward in light of AI.
Most definitely. That's an ongoing conversation that we're having continually. One of the biggest concerns, if we want students to be able to take a test really well, we can program students to take tests pretty well. And if we want to use AI to do that, it can be faster. The question is what does it, I don't think that's what we need in the future. We don't need students to just be able to take tests. We need to be really thoughtful humans and thinking about what does humanity look like and need to look like in 20 years. And I think that's a big conversation that we're having internally. And it's not always a pleasant conversation because it's uncomfortable to think about the things that we've been doing in the education system and aren't going to be working. And I think overall, those of us who have done research in education for decades, we know the education system hasn't been working. I think it's time that we have to disrupt it and redo it. And AI might be the disruptor to make that happen.
We've been trying to revise the testing system now for a couple of decades. I remember when Jamie and I were young men, we were working on video games and STEM video games and analyses of those games. We could not come up with a paper and pencil test metric to determine students' knowledge gains. And the reason was because that was a terrible way to construct an exam, right? I want students to be able to think critically about the scientific value of the content. And if you continue to ask the same questions using the same format that we've used for decades, we're going to continue to have the same terrible results. We need to reform. So I'm one of those people, if you didn't know, who's going to stand up and scream that we need to reform, and have been doing it for 20 years. Jamie's been listening to me. So thank you, Jamie, for listening to me all these years.
I'm next to you usually. So
Okay. So here's another question. What sort of guidance policies are being recommended for the verification or validation of content generated via AI? For example, sorting out hallucinations, bad math, logical reasoning.
well, as I work with computer scientists all the time, we've recognized that they've created themselves a human problem. For a long time, you know, computer scientists and stuff could validate software systems because they weren't agentic. They didn't do the things they behaved as they were supposed to. And those of us in the social sciences have been arguing for a long time that studying humans and testing humans is a very difficult thing because we hallucinate and we do various things that cause problems with our assessment systems. And essentially, computer science has created that problem for themselves. They've created a more human. And as these systems come online that are quote unquote more intelligent, you can argue what intelligence is. We've done it for decades. It's going to create a bigger and bigger sort of problem. So the best way to do it, you can use obviously some scientific techniques in computer science, et cetera. AI4education.org, I mentioned them earlier. They have a leaderboard that they're looking at, some of the LLMs that are doing better than others, and that leaderboard is dynamic. It changes, and they're running it through test protocols. So if you're looking at a large scale sort of thing, but again, it comes down to making sure the human is in the center and having humans validate that work and having students also critically validate what the AI puts out and making sure that the human's responsible for what they're submitting as human work, whether the AI is helping or not.
Well, I wanted to thank all of you. I want to be mindful of your time. Thanks to all of our participants for attending. We do have another AI webinar coming up on March 6th, where we will be inviting educators here in Maine to have more of a back and forth conversation with members of the CITL team on what we're doing here in Maine and what we're seeing and the boots on the ground in school districts here, and how that reflects what the CITL Center is seeing at a national level. So thanks again to everybody for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.